Okay, we are back, and we would like to proceed with the next presentation, and welcome to the table Dan and Patrick with the Ripken Group to take it away.
Well, thanks, and hopefully everyone can hear us well. We do have a little presentation that we'll run through, but I'd like to do just a brief introduction because some of you I've met before, some of you I just met for the first time, and some of you I haven't met yet. So I'll let Patrick introduce himself first and then talk about why we're here.
My name is Patrick Farno. I'm project coordinator with Ripken Design. Joined the company about 2 years ago and have been working primarily in the feasibility, worked on the initial Hagerstown feasibility study, and worked extensively on the alternative site assessment as well.
Yep, and so Patrick's been with us all the way through this project, really since it started up. And I'm Dan Taylor, I'm the project manager. I've been leading this team on all of the work that we've done here in Hagerstown. I do want to thank you, Mr. Mayor, and the council for having us here today and for bringing us back and allowing us to kind of continue this partnership that we've had with you for the last year since we did the original feasibility study. What we really wanted to do today was show you what we found when it comes to these alternative sites that you asked us to take a look at. We've done an assessment that we think presents a apples-to-apples comparison with the assessment that we did in the downtown feasibility study. And so we looked at two sites for you and hopefully give you the factual basis to be able to look at whether this is something you guys want to pursue, where you would like to pursue it, and so that you have all the information to be able to move forward. So I'll try and keep the presentation as short as possible. Realistically, there are plenty of slides here, but they're mostly images that we can run through nice and easily and kind of provide a little context for this whole project. And then really, as many questions, comments that you guys have for us, we're happy to be here and answer them for as long as you'd like. So really the basis of this study was for us to take a look at these alternative sites, the municipal stadium site and the hospital site as alternatives to the downtown stadium development. And we did this in a couple of ways. And if you don't mind, I am going to use stadium as shorthand since that is what I heard you guys say a lot in the last meeting as opposed to the Multi-Use Sports and Event Center, which is a more accurate representation of what it is. Stadium's much less of a mouthful. So we did this in a few different ways. We wanted to take a look at the sites themselves. They're very close to one another, but they have some different components, as you well know, that would affect things like construction costs, that may affect things like viability. So we did this through a site analysis. We also wanted to look at some examples of other stadiums throughout the country. When we did the original feasibility study, we looked at some other sites of downtown, fringe urban and suburban stadiums to take a look at what sort of economic impact they had on their overall areas. So we went back to those same stadiums and took a look at the stadium footprint, the stadium parking to try and get an understanding of what is normal, what is acceptable for developments like this. And then we go through the exact same model that we developed in the original feasibility study, and we use the information site-specific to the municipal stadium site and to the hospital site to plug all of that into the same model and try and understand what your fiscal and economic impacts would be if you pursued a project in either of these locations and how it would be different from the downtown site. So from the site analysis standpoint, we really looked at these factors of analysis. I'm not going to go into them too in depth, but really these are the things that are going to affect whether or not you can build a stadium on these sites, whether it's even a viable option, and whether there might be issues that cause you heartburn down the line, whether there may be potential cost escalators that you need to be aware of, or potential headaches that you might need to go through. And so we're actually going to go through briefly what those results really were. And that really is the core of the report before you get to the financial side of things. So we're going to do the municipal stadium site first. But as just a quick overview, I know you guys all know where the three sites are. But I thought that this, just the overhead view is somewhat powerful in that they are really, really close to one another. And because of that, we don't think that there's any substantive difference in how they would, succeed as a stadium from a baseball standpoint, from an attracting people standpoint. We believe that that is a market-driven consideration. By moving the site half a mile here, half a mile there, we don't think that that changes the market in terms of the potential success as a venue. We do think that the changes that you're going to see are changes involving the surrounding properties. It's going to be changes involving things like traffic flow, walkability, the impact on the downtown. We think that those will change based on location, but that when we get down to the economic impact piece, the economic impact, as we have defined it in the original study, was spending done if the Hagerstown Suns stayed in Hagerstown and if they left. And that analysis does not change here. And so you'll see that the economic impact is exactly the same for these alternative sites as it would be, or as it was in the original study. But that there are some property value changes, some additional development changes that are reflected in each of these three sites. So the municipal stadium site, as it currently sits, is almost a 10-acre site. It has plenty of issues for the stadium itself. The field is in poor condition, and there's some water issues. There's some grade issues. There are things that, in our original analysis, we don't think are easily solved. And part of the issue is that the site itself is landlocked. And so in order to have a potentially viable site, you need to expand beyond the current site constraints. If you look at that map, that's actually a map of the current zoning of the area with a quarter-mile and a half-mile ring around it. One of the things that you'll see is that the site really sits in kind of at the crossroads of an industrial area and a residential area. We think that that has effects on the development potential going into the future. Although a large redevelopment effort could change some of that zoning or could be done to kind of alter that landscape, the industrial piece, especially to the south of the site, it's a big industrial site, and we believe that it's probably going to stay that way, and as such probably won't be affected by a new stadium from a positive development standpoint. Similarly, the residential is a stable residential just to the east and northeast, and we believe that there's not a lot of additional development opportunity at that portion of the site either. So really a lot of the development impacts, when they occur on this site, we believe will happen to the northwest, west, and kind of due north areas in the municipal stadium site. In order to expand the footprint, there's really only one direction to go because of how the roads sit, and that is to start moving west through one of the industrial parcels that is in current active use and potentially into Hager Park. And what we analyzed here were two concepts that were presented to us through city staff, and I believe it was originally developed by the Hagerstown Suns that they contracted out, that looked at two concepts that expanded this footprint. So we wanted to see what those effects could potentially be for each of the two concepts. So this is concept A. The current stadium, here's my pointer, ends right here at this line. And that is town run, the small waterway that cuts through the side of the site. This additional parcel to the left, as I may or may not have lost my pointer, oh wait, that'll do it. This additional site here is an actively used industrial property. It is just to the left of the stadium. To expand the footprint here, you would abut Hager Park as it currently sits and take over that industrial property to fulfill concept A here. And the concept is pretty interesting. It gives you some additional on-site parking. It gives you the potential for future development here, 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 as well as a potential parking deck over here. There's some nearby parking on Mill Street, about 400 spaces up here. And so this is one of the concepts that we analyzed, and there are some issues that we'll bring up with that, but there are also some positive things there as well. Concept B takes the current site of Municipal Stadium, which is right here, and it leaves that completely open for on-site parking and future development. And what it does is it takes that industrial parcel and a portion of Hager Park, and it converts that into the new stadium site. And I believe this is also a city-owned property up top here that would be a part of that. And so this is obviously a much larger site. It'll give you some more on-site parking. And it would avoid one of the major problems we see with Concept A, which is it keeps town run on the perimeter instead of having to build on top of it. So those are the two concepts that we analyzed for Municipal Stadium. From a parking standpoint, one of our factors of analysis, Concept A gives you some on-site parking, including a parking deck, and it gives you a little bit of off-site parking over here that is accessible, but basically you would walk through Hager Park and come in through the front door this way, or you come down Baltimore Street and have a little created walkway here and enter in over here. So this layout gives you 934 total parking spaces in kind of this immediate walkable area. In the original study, we identified a potential need for about 1,100 spaces that would kind of meet your anticipated nightly usage. So you're a little short on parking here, and there's not a particularly obvious way to make it up other than to just move further away from the site to make up some of that parking. In Concept B, by using this whole new space, the current site Municipal Stadium, for parking, you're able to get actually extra parking, about 1,366 spaces based on this analysis. It also makes this Mill Street site much more accessible with a walkway that feeds directly into a concourse right here. We think that this is a really nice way to handle the parking situation. It keeps everything close in, and as long as there's some sort of major access point here to the stadium, you have a very nice environment for people who are coming to the games. What you don't necessarily have is an environment that is conducive to people, lingering around after the game or maybe trying to get out to local businesses, because there is plenty of parking right here on site. They can go to the stadium, they can leave. So that's your kind of parking analysis for A and B. From an access standpoint, access is really going to be no different in either scenario from what it is at the current Municipal Stadium site. It's an established site. People are used to how you drive there. People who live there are used to how it works. Industrial uses are used to that as well. You're using your arterials. It's dual highway, and you're coming in here to either Cannon or Municipal there. There are some secondary site access points as well, on your secondary roads. We think that congestion, traffic, all of these things are really going to be exactly the same as how they currently are at Municipal Stadium. As we talked about in the parking piece, you also have a couple new walking possibilities coming from this parking lot, the bulk of which would go through Hager Park and along the road here, which is actually relatively nice and walkable. Traffic flow standpoint, same thing. Your heaviest traffic flows are coming in off a dual highway, and really that's how they're going to stay. You're going to continue to be able to use some of the secondary roads, some of the feeder roads. The new piece of this is that there is additional off-site parking, so people are going to be able to fan out a little bit more and not all bottleneck at the Municipal Stadium parking lot itself. But otherwise, you're looking at traffic flow patterns that are going to be the same as they were or as they are currently. From a walkability standpoint, the area has okay walkability. We've put a walk score here, which is this is an online service that they look at, how close you are to other points of interest and other active things. It is not the gospel or anything. It's more just a point of reference. So it is a somewhat walkable site to the neighborhood right here and to some of these points northwest. We do not believe that it is walkable to downtown. Even if it technically is within the half-mile radius of downtown, we don't really expect people to make that walk before or after the game, mostly because they wouldn't be compelled to. They're able to park right on site. You also have to walk through a number of residential and kind of non-pedestrian-oriented commercial areas to get to the pedestrian-oriented commercial areas. So although there are sidewalks along here, this is a relatively pleasant walk there. You can take this walk here, and it's really not that bad. There's not a compelling reason for people who are coming to the stadium to make that walk. So, and we think it is not at all walkable to points east or points south because of the intensity of the road, lack of sidewalks, and the industrial area. So some other things to consider on this site. We have some concerns about town run that we expressed in the report. Specifically, the current stadium has a number of issues with the field and their ability to grow grass and keep grass and those sorts of things. And we're not exactly sure what the cause of those are, but we suspect that in no small part, some of it has to do with the proximity to the town run and Teetum Creek, high water table there, potential soil concerns. So this is something that, you would need to do more analysis of this down the line as to what the actual conditions are. We think in scenario A, where the stadium potentially sits on top of town run, that may also present some issues from a construction standpoint or some cost escalation. We think that money can really solve everything on these types of projects, but is that the best use of the funds? It's hard to say. You may need to do some culverts, some diversions of the town run, and that may add some headache to the project as well. Site B avoids, or concept B avoids that. Town runs really stays the same as it is now. Again, just as in any project, you'd want to take a look at soils and those sorts of things. But we think because of that, concept B is a much easier road ahead than concept A is. The industrial areas are also worth noting. It hasn't really been an issue to this point, or if it is, people are used to it, that you are really adjacent to active industrial uses. They're not particularly obnoxious uses. They're not particularly, bad uses. It doesn't deter people from coming to a game. But the fact of the matter is you have a lot of people coming in to a potential event, as well as businesses that are operating in their industrial uses, and there may be an inherent conflict there. You also, if you recall kind of the zoning map, there's a big chunk of purple. By pursuing the municipal stadium expansion plan, you do break up that purple zone a little bit, and there's value from an industrial use standpoint in kind of the agglomeration of property, that industrial uses work very, very well together. And as you split that up, to the degree that any industrial uses are left on the fringe, it may or may not make those less viable standing on their own now that they need to compete with things like stadium traffic or other non-industrial uses. So we think that's worthy of keeping in mind as well. Hager Park, which comes right next to the site, we think is potentially an excellent amenity and could supplement the park very, very well. It can make a pleasant walk through. The two could play off each other very, very nicely. We also anticipate in the report that you may get some public and citizen feedback about whether or not they want a stadium that goes up to Hager Park or even encroaches on the current land of Hager Park, which concept B would do. It would take up a chunk of that. So we think that's worthy of well. And then development barriers we talked about. Just there does not appear to be as much development opportunity because of where the site sits as there may be at some of the other sites.
And just one more piece on the development barriers. Much of our analysis is based on a new stadium in a new area, less than renovations of current stadiums. So it's hard to quantify. It might be impossible to quantify. But in theory, much of the effect of a new stadium has already been felt on the area around Municipal Stadium. And that may deter additional development because it's already an established residential area, things of that nature.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. When we developed this model, we really developed it as what does a new stadium do to an area that does not have one? And so all of our metrics are really based off of that. And in the interest of giving a comparison that you could hold constant across all of the sites, we kept the model the same. That model may not be the best model for this site. It would really be more appropriate to look at same site replacements and the effects that those have on other properties. To Patrick's point, a lot of the value of a stadium may already be incorporated into the existing properties. There's been a stadium there for a really long time. All of these properties have existed with a stadium there, and so the value of that may already be inherent in their property values. So you may not see development benefits that are the same as you would see in an area that does not have a stadium at this point. So the hospital site, very nearby, you can even see Municipal Stadium still sitting right there. I mean, they are close. You can see one from the other. But interestingly, they have very different impacts in terms of the surrounding properties and development opportunities. It is a small site. It is 6.5 acres, and it is tight. If you're talking about building a new facility there, you would need to use every single inch of it, and you would not really have the opportunity for any on-site parking. Fortunately, there is a lot of adjacent parking. This was a hospital, as you know. It was used to traffic. It was used to people coming in at unusual business hours. And it has a lot of really, really good connectivity because of that. You know, you need to be able to get in and out of a hospital relatively easily, and so the site is really strong along those lines. It also sits in a special planning area. So unlike the municipal stadium site, which may require some zoning changes or other kind of alterations of that type, there is planning flexibility that would allow you to build something like a stadium on this site without a major overhaul of zoning or going through a major rezoning effort. There was a study done this year by Meritus with their consultant Morrison Ritchie that looked at the development opportunities of the site. They found that there is very limited opportunity for residential, office, and retail development on the site. They identified that something like a park could work, and that there were some infill development opportunities adjacent, but for a number of reasons that we do mention in the report, the market is just not there for your traditional development on that site. Because of that, we think that something like a stadium could be a very effective way to use that site and capitalize on the additional infill development opportunities that exist adjacent. So from a parking standpoint, you can see there's much less yellow than there was on the other sites. There are far fewer spaces. The pink is the site itself. There is no on-site parking that you could really do, save for maybe a few employee spots or a few player spots. But there are a number of adjacent sites. This is that same 400 spaces that we were using at the municipal site. There's a little triangle lot, which realistically is accessible from the municipal site as well. This is the current parking deck with its 280 and change, I think, spaces. And there's a lot behind that as well with another 125 or so spaces. So you add it all together, and those yellow pieces of parking give you about 858 spaces, all of which are functionally really a part of that stadium site. There are no barriers in between the stadium and the parking. There's also a piece of land right next to the parking deck that could be used for parking. It could be used for a new parking deck. There are opportunities there for additional on-site parking should you choose to pursue them. What this site offers from a parking standpoint that the other one doesn't is there is public parking in already established lots as you start moving in close towards downtown, and those are walkable areas, as we'll mention, that we don't think are walkable from Municipal Stadium. That being said, you are short on parking here relative to what we project being needed. From an access standpoint, access here is pretty good. We actually drove it on our way in to make sure that we were telling the truth or to confirm our results. So access is pretty good. You come in off Dual Highway up right where the McDonald's is. There's already a left turn in place for you, and you hop down on Cannon Avenue, and it takes you right to the site. What it also allows you to do is split off. So you're using arterials the whole way, just like you are for Municipal Stadium. It works from both directions. Possibly even a little bit better than Municipal Stadium does by taking advantage of Washington as well. And it offers far more filtering opportunities for vehicles to get to these different parking lots. So instead of everyone coming to really a single site, there are a few more opportunities to split off and filter down on the secondary roads to the different parking spaces, which kind of is a nice thing from a traffic management standpoint and from a flow standpoint. From a flow standpoint, again, everything's really coming off of either Washington or Dual Highway here. That's going to be the majority of your access. You do still have some access from the south. People could actually go the way that they currently go to Municipal Stadium and come up from the bottom. That would be a suitable secondary route as well, and it would give access to those lots in the southeast. From a walkability standpoint, we think that this site is very walkable. Apparently WalkScore also thinks that the site is very walkable. Of interest here is that this whole hash marked area That's your arts and entertainment district. That's the downtown. That's where things are. You are not far away from that. You know, it's really a matter of a couple of blocks. And you have a built-in road in Washington that's really made to take pedestrians there. Now, they may not make that trip right now, but that road is very pedestrian friendly. There are nice wide sidewalks. There's pedestrian-oriented commercial structures that are in place. You're actually closer on Antietam. You could cut right across on Antietam and walk over too. But we think that from a development potential standpoint, that there is a bridge that exists on Washington Street that could really tie the stadium at the hospital site and the arts and entertainment district together to the point where the two really connect in a strong way. And we suspect that if this site were chosen and the stadium were built here, that a lot of the private development dollars would be focused on Washington Street to help create that corridor. And then, you know, again, in the downtown area. There's some additional property kind of surrounding the stadium that would benefit from that as well, because your walk corridors really are whatever your access points on the stadium are, and then over to the arts and entertainment district. And we think that Washington Street is the primary way that that's gonna happen. This site also offers something that Municipal Stadium doesn't, that's visibility. And it's visibility in two ways. You've got views from the stadium that are actually quite nice, especially looking back towards the mountains. You do have some view of downtown, or you theoretically would, depending on how the stadium is built and what you're, you know, where you are in the seats. But these views here, like I said, we were just standing up there. They're really quite nice. And it offers, you know, kind of this signature piece from the stadium. Yeah, all these stadiums you see, they've got some view looking out over something. And this one's a real positive of this site that the Municipal Stadium site doesn't offer. You also have visibility from the road. And by the road, I mean dual highway here. You can see it driving up. It's gonna be on a hill. There's gonna be a structure. There's gonna be light standards. This is a potential gateway project. It's not right there on the road, but as you drive up and you see this, you're saying, hey, what's that? Look at their stadium. This is something really sitting at the top of the hill, overlooking downtown and serving as a potential gateway here. So we think from a visibility standpoint and from a view corridor standpoint that this is a positive of the site, that the Municipal Stadium site and that the downtown site, neither of them have in the same way. So other things, I already mentioned the Meredith and MRA study. They also think that there's a gateway potential at the site here. We spoke about the infill already. They talked about a public park as a potential thing. We're essentially viewing the stadium as you know, a public park substitute that would serve some of the same function but would really be a public amenity. Things to consider about the site itself: it is very steep. It is at the top of the hill, and the land moves a lot. So the topography is something you're going to have to play with. You know, if you start looking at this site more seriously, because it may either reduce the amount of area you can realistically build on, it may increase your construction cost, and that's something you don't have to worry about at the Municipal Stadium site in the same way. Something you don't have to worry about at the downtown site the same way, and something that's worthy of note. From an environmental standpoint, there's also been some talk that we heard of that there may be some debris from the hospital demolition on the site itself. We don't know the extent of that, but that's something else. You know, as you dig deeper or start carting things off-site, it's going to increase the cost of construction. So that's another factor from an environmental standpoint that you're going to have to explore a little more in depth. One thing that I didn't mention is, from an environmental standpoint at the Municipal Stadium site, there's an industrial property adjacent to you. There may be similar environmental concerns by taking over an industrial piece of property into the stadium site that you would need to examine further as well. You also have, unlike the Municipal Stadium site and somewhat similar to the downtown site, the potential for some neighbor conflicts with the properties on King Street and in the adjacent neighborhood there. We think that there's actually a potential, like we did with downtown, for a really unique environment for a ballpark, that it can be something where the stadium and the residential areas actually marry together in a really interesting and kind of eclectic way. We think that it makes it a much more pedestrian-friendly environment, And ultimately, we think that it provides value to the adjacent residential area. You know, first thing I said, and I said it to the mayor when we looked at the site, first time looking down on King Street, which is where there are a bunch of properties facing the hospital site. This could be a Yawkey Way, like in Boston. This could be, you know, like Wrigleyville. There's really a lot of potential there for a dynamic pedestrian environment that takes advantage of those existing historic properties facing a new stadium. We also think that because there was a hospital site there, or a hospital there for many, many years, that these neighbors may be a little more used to some of the disruptions that a stadium could cause, because, you know, there were ambulances, there were a lot of activities going on at non-traditional hours, and we believe that some of those properties may already kind of have that disruption built in, since it's only recently that the hospital came down. We don't think that a stadium is any more obnoxious of a neighbor than a hospital, in a manner of speaking. And the potential for the unique venue, you know, we think there's a really interesting ballpark environment potential on this site. So we looked at some other facilities, and there are images in the report itself that show all of this, but one of the concerns we had is the hospital site is small, it's 6.5 acres. Turns out there are other sites around the country that have been extremely successful that have also worked on 6.5 acres with no parking. Chattanooga is the perfect example. There are some other slightly larger sites, you know, West Virginia Power at 7.2 acres. The downtown site was only 6.8 acres. What we wanted to do was make sure that we weren't barking up the wrong tree completely. 6.5 acres with no parking can be done, and it can be done successfully. Obviously, other sites have larger acreage footprints with more on-site parking, similar to what you see at Municipal Stadium, and those can be done successfully as well. So by looking at some of the other facilities around the country, none of the information that we gathered disqualifies any of these sites. We think that both of them are entirely workable and could be good solutions for a new stadium facility. So then we looked at the financial projections, and what our model does is it takes all of the properties within a quarter mile of the site. It takes how those sites are currently assessed and the composition of the sites, be it residential or commercial or industrial or what have you, and it projects a series of growth scenarios based on what we saw in Greenville, South Carolina, when we did the original feasibility study, and at other downtown stadium sites around the country. And so these projection models are exactly the same. The only thing that has changed between the original feasibility study and now is that the properties themselves that are impacted are different than they were at the downtown site. One thing that we see right off the bat in all of these scenarios is that there's, in addition to new development, there's also a change in the composition of the properties. We see more apartments and more residential development, apartments, condos, and residential, I should say. We see less commercial and we see less industrial. And that is just based on the information we gathered in the original feasibility study, and those are the composition changes that we would expect to see. So on the municipal stadium site, this is that buffer within a quarter mile there, and you can see the composition changes. This is the percentages right now, have about 47% commercial, 5% industrial, 27% residential, 19% residential condominium. One thing that this doesn't account for from a percentage, this is properties, it is not land mass. So the industrial properties only take up 5% of the parcels, but they take up a substantial portion of the land mass. We expect to see those things change with a little bit less commercial, a little bit more residential. Ultimately, the development effects from a composition change are not particularly significant. As currently assessed, there's about $83 million of property within a quarter mile of the municipal stadium site. Within the hospital site, there's currently about $127 million of assessed property within that quarter mile area. And we see more commercial as it currently sits, more residential, fewer residential condominiums, and far, far fewer industrial properties. So when we run that through the model, we basically get our summary projections of the hospital site, municipal site, and then we compared it to the downtown site. One thing that if you were to go back and read the original study, and compare it to this study, the downtown numbers are going to look different. We have updated the downtown projections to reflect the latest assessment data. So we've been working with the previous year's property assessments. Now we're working with this year's property assessments. Everything is working off of this year's property assessments. And that's just more on the apples to apples scale. We want to make sure that you had some even numbers to take a look at. So from this, kind of the nuts and bolts of it is the hospital site, we believe, has the largest development effect based on this model. A lot of that is attributable to the higher assessed property value as it currently exists. And so we believe that the value of those properties are going to continue to increase. We believe that there are a number of infill development opportunities there. Based on how our model is structured, that gives the highest return from a tax revenue standpoint for the city and for the county. Municipal stadium comes in at the bottom. This is consistent with kind of what our theory was going in. There are fewer properties there. They're assessed lower, and the industrial component kind of cuts off a potential for the type of development that you would expect to see from this type of project. And when you look at the original downtown location, it falls somewhere right in between. And a lot of what we ran into in the downtown properties, there are a number of tax exempt properties, including government properties, that fall within that quarter-mile radius. So as we limit ourselves to a quarter mile, you're not going to get development benefit from that from a tax revenue standpoint. And so we see that at the downtown site, whereas we don't see it at the hospital site nearly as much. It's the downtown properties are assessed, I believe, in between municipal and the hospital site. So the model really filtered out. Once we saw what the assessment data was, it worked out kind of as we had predicted it would, which is to say that the hospital site would give the highest return based on this model. From an economic impact standpoint, I mentioned this at the very beginning, but we don't expect any changes in economic impact from the original study or across any of these sites. We do think that there will be a significant economic impact compared to the scenario of losing baseball entirely or having the Hagerstown Suns leave the market. There's a construction impact that's associated with the construction of the new ballpark in terms of money and in terms of jobs, and we believe that there is a very strong economic impact that is related to the money that the Suns spend in the market currently and the money that is attributable to in-stadium spending. The original study is kind of clear on this, but to reemphasize the point, we're not talking about outside money being spent here in terms of visitor spending. It's a very controversial issue, and we addressed it in the original report, but this is just direct spending attributable to the team existing in the market. And so we don't see any reason to believe why that would change from one site to another. And so to kind of try and pull it all together and compare the three sites, walkability is going to be best on the downtown site and the hospital site. And we believe that filters into the most development potential, including the most downtown revitalization potential. The municipal stadium site is the biggest and is likely going to be the easiest to build on, with the potential exception of Town Run. Both the municipal stadium sites the municipal stadium site and the hospital site have superior vehicle access to the downtown site. You get to use arterials the whole way, and there are well-established routes to get into where those facilities are and to easily access parking. The downtown site, a lot of that project was, a piece of it had to do with a parking deck, and if you look at the net revenue projections that we show, I may actually be able to go back to that here. You'll see a difference in the debt service between the downtown site and these other two sites. All of these have assumed that a stadium of the exact same size and scope and cost are plopped on each of these three sites. That clearly will not be the case. They're going to be the variations of the sites that we talked about. The stadium program might change. But one thing that the downtown analysis was looking at was building a parking deck that would be used on non-game days and would generate revenue for the city. Because of that, it would kind of reduce what that debt service number would be, because there would be an additional revenue piece. That parking deck is not being looked at, or we did not look at it at least, at the municipal stadium site and at the hospital site. So that's why those net revenues are different, why there's really not an offset there to reduce that debt service. And so when you go back and look at it, the downtown site's parking, we believe is going to be used during regular business and on non-game days, maybe to access Arts and Entertainment District, maybe to access, some adjacent businesses, or for people to get to work. We think the hospital site will also do that to a degree, in the way that, it's actually being used now, and we think would continue to be used with additional development nearby. We do not think that that will be the case at the municipal stadium site at all. In terms of development initiatives, downtown revitalization, downtown development, we think both the hospital site and the downtown site are very consistent with those goals, and kind of dovetail very nicely with an overall idea of revitalizing downtown Hagerstown. We do not think that the municipal stadium site accomplishes this goal. Hospital site has the most property values and the highest assessed value within the quarter-mile radius. Based on how our model is structured, it anticipates the highest benefit from a revenue standpoint. So yeah, the most public revenue from the hospital site, followed by downtown, followed by municipal stadium. So that's the rundown. And now we're here for any and all questions and comments.
I'll ask my colleagues on the council if they will have any questions or comments they'd like to make. Mr. Munson.
Thank you. I'd like to tell you this is a good piece of work.
Thank you.
Put a lot of time and effort into this. It's a good piece of work. Did you have, I suspect, and maybe I'm going to be corrected in the next couple of minutes, but I suspect that what will be seriously considered is the Hospital Hill, as I like to call it, site. And I guess it was Plan B, one where you moved it up to into Hager Park a little bit. They're probably the two favorites, but maybe not. Were there any discussions at all about how much extra the potential for environmental costs could be? I know this was not your responsibility, but I'm curious. You've run into these things before, I'm sure.
We did not look at that. We talked about whether or not there was a potential for those additional costs. We did not even attempt to dive into it in the scope of this analysis, mostly because it requires some real engineering on the sites and understanding of what we're dealing with from an environmental standpoint, from a debris standpoint, topography and grading. I don't know that I even have a gut feeling on it. I will say that going to Hospital Hill, it is very hilly. And I suspect that it would cost a good amount of money to build on that site, more so than it would at Municipal Stadium or the downtown site from a grading standpoint. That being said, good stadium design could do some very, very interesting things with a hilly site that could include access points at one grade and another grade. There are a lot of design innovations that you could put into place that could not only take advantage of that hill, but potentially take it from being a cost liability to being something that really makes it a unique site. So I certainly cannot say for sure what the potential magnitudes of cost escalation would be between those two sites. But I think there are ways to deal with both of them, but I would suspect that the hill and the potential debris is a cost escalator for the Hospital Hill site, and that Town Run is a cost escalator, and possible environmental remediation on the industrial site is a cost escalator for the municipal site.
Thank you. Are there other downtown sites around that you all have participated in, not necessarily the ones in Hagerstown, that provide any kind of transportation for people to get from their cars to the sites?
That's a good question. I don't know if I know the answer offhand. Do you have any sense?
Not offhand, but I think it's something that's possible. It's certainly a feasible venture, but not a stadium that comes to mind.
And you're saying outside of traditional public transportation
Yeah.
routes, like a tram or something, like a shuttle, essentially.
shuttle, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of one off the top of my head. That's not to say that there aren't. Lots of times what we do see is that private businesses, specifically restaurants or bars, will often run private shuttles so that people will come up there, just, grab a bite to eat before the game or grab a drink after the game, and they'll shuttle people back and forth. We've seen the same thing with hotels. We'll shuttle people to and from. So those do exist. In general, I've certainly seen them come from the private side to kind of support those businesses, but there may be some public initiatives as well.
Okay, my wife tells me that people won't want to use Hospital Hill because they're too old and they don't want to make that walk. I mean, and I have to tell you, that was a complaint when the hospital was there. People having to walk from the parking deck up to the hospital, that was, if they were ill, that was quite a walk. Any response to that?
Yeah, I think this goes back to the stadium design piece as well. This is a tight site. That whole thing, it's not going to be a hospital at the top of the hill. That whole property is going to be stadium or related to the stadium. And so when you're walking it, all of a sudden the front gates are at the street, really, before you even get into the stadium. Then there are things like escalators, elevators, that can get you up there, depending on how the stadium is designed. It also, just from a perception standpoint, is no longer this thing at the top of the hill that you need to make it up to. You're there once you enter at the street level. Then you're in the stadium. It actually feels different, and your mind perceives it in a different way. So I think you're right, that there is a hill you need to get up to at some point. But it's one of those things that I think can be solved very, very easily through design solutions.
Okay, and my final question. The area of the hospital site on which Pangborn Hall sat, do you know what I'm talking about?
I do not, but if you want to point it out on a picture, I can scroll back to it.
It was up the hill from the parking deck,
Okay.
the area that's not paved or anything.
Yep.
How many cars, how much additional parking? Now, when you talked about parking at that site a little while ago, did the parking numbers that you showed include the use? Okay, did the parking numbers that you showed, the 858, include the use of that?
So this is the parking deck here. This is the site right there. Yep.
No.
Oh, the green site. No, we do not have a parking space number here. You could fit parking there. You could have additional parking there for sure. We did not count it because it's not a parking lot currently.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it could be.
Okay.
Yep. Or it could be something else.
It could be. That
Yep.
answers my
Yeah.
If I recall correctly, to answer one of Councilmember Munson's questions, if I recall correctly, in the original Ripken report, it was mentioned that there is a shuttle, or maybe this was research I did independently, but there is a shuttle, I believe, that takes people from an off-site parking to the Greenville Stadium. That is about a 10-minute ride, as I recall looking at some information on the internet. So I do think that that's somewhat common
You're right.
practice.
Now that you mention it, I think I do recall that, yeah.
Just to throw that out there. Mr. Brubaker, you look like you're anxious to make a statement or ask a question.
Oh, no more than my peers? I don't think so. The cost of the stadium that you assumed to arrive at your debt service numbers, how much was that?
I believe this is the $30 million number that we've used consistently
It's
across everything.
consistent, that's
Yep.
what I
Yep.
understood. So, and you've not taken it into account site discrepancies like we've been talking about. And it's easy to see if you went to the site A for the existing stadium and you assume town run, although I'm not sure, since that's a 9-acre site, why you have to assume acquiring that. But if you're going to build a whole new stadium, I don't know why you could not acquire that, since we already have 9 acres and we're talking about 6 acres elsewhere. It's not clear to me why you need to go over the water. If you talk about building a whole new stadium at this expense, and we're not talking about renovating municipal stadium, in which case there's understandable concerns that you have to move the, I think it's the left field side over, you know. So, you know, I don't understand why, you know, that would necessarily be an environmental impediment. It's already a larger site than what you're talking about at the hospital or what we were talking about downtown. So it seems to me if you build a new site, you could just build it to, you know, just to the edge of that. The second thing is the hospital site obviously will have issues as to, you know, the hospital has a rubble fill there and so on and so forth. And downtown, there are some environmental issues which were pointed out by prior studies. So they all have issues. Even Site A, which is Site B for the municipal complex, has issues because you use a park. It's the easiest to build on, but we give away a park. Hager Park, except for a little corner, goes away under your plan. So I'm going to make that clear. There is a cost. That's an opportunity cost. A park goes away. So we have all that. But we're talking about a $30 million investment in any event. I just want to make that clear at each of those locations and what will happen. The second thing is your assumption of return is just a rote taking the accessible base within a quarter-mile radius and increasing that by a conservative, moderate, and high projection. That's basically how you arrived at your return.
Yeah.
So if the properties right now, to this day, on dual highway, et cetera, are more valuable than the properties downtown, you're increasing, you know, that base, and therefore you're getting a higher return. Correct?
Yep,
And
that's how the
downtown,
model is
because of its current condition and so forth, starts from a lower base, and therefore the amount of return, when you increase it by a net percentage, is not as great.
Right.
That's how you've done your model.
Yes.
Right. So if downtown properties have a potential of more, it's not because of their permitted densities and so forth, that's not accounted for in your, if downtown properties were redeveloped, the potential for a higher return is greater than a property with lower zoning densities and so forth. That's not reflected in your report.
Is
that correct?
That is correct, yeah. And just to kind of piggyback on that point, that is one of the things that's a limitation of this model. When we built the model, we were looking strictly at a downtown redevelopment site and not necessarily what we're calling kind of an urban fringe site with the hospital. And so that is true with greater density, greater development opportunity, and perhaps additional available sites at the downtown location. There may be greater upside there than is reflected.
Right, because if downtown was redeveloped to even a percentage of its potential FAR ratio or whatever term you want to use, it would be greater than what a lower density zone on the dual highway or in the East End would produce. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, I want to establish that. Finally, as walkability goes, you know, we're not putting this is separate from the downtown stadium, but I just want to make a simple comment. I haven't seen anything here that says it would be cheaper to build elsewhere than on the site that had been proposed downtown. So, you know, I don't see a difference so far, and we don't have engineering projections and so forth, but in order of magnitude, it's not going to be that different. So people, if you're trying to develop downtown, the stadium on the site that had originally been proposed is right adjacent to the core, the traditional core of downtown. And the walkability is you go right through that core to get to the A&E district. Now, at the hospital site, you would go through a fringe and then you go into the edge of downtown, but it's more of a residential mixed-use commercial area. So if that area developed, that would be a whole new, different sector of intense development if that was the case. And it would not reflect the traditional core. It would be a new area of emphasis. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep.
And once again, I say you know, your projections do not assume a cheaper cost in any of these sites.
No, we're assuming the same cost for all the sites, that if you had a fixed budget, that money would filter in certain ways that are site-specific to reach a total cost that's the same.
Those are my questions for now.
In your analysis, you described the hospital site as being downtown. What brings you to that conclusion?
We think it's downtown and realistically, we have mentioned it as a downtown, and we kind of look at it as an urban fringe in one of the tables. It's right on the cusp of what your traditional downtown would be. We think it's downtown insofar as it's a highly walkable site. It's easily accessible to commercial and high-density residential areas, while the stadium itself or the hospital site itself may not sit in downtown. It is so close to downtown that, especially with the additional development that would be projected, it would feel one and the same from kind of a development standpoint.
Yeah, and when you look at the zoning map and you look at the quarter-mile and half-mile radii, you get into that downtown mixed-use area at the hospital site, whereas you don't at Municipal Stadium, and that's really where that came from.
And wouldn't it be true to kind of piggyback on what Councilmember Brubaker was saying, that redevelopment in any of these areas is really not considered in terms of the return on the investment according to your model, is that right? So in other words, you said there's a lot of potential along East Washington for redevelopment around there, and so the point being that, yes, the redevelopment of some of the core properties, if you will, some of the larger density buildings and properties in the core of the city, that's not taken into consideration under that plan, but neither would be any other redevelopment around the old hospital or around Municipal Stadium. Is that
Right.
correct?
Yeah, the way the model's set up, it kind of takes it into account and it kind of doesn't. So what it does is it does look at the properties as they currently exist. So if there's a high density property, wherever that's assessed, that's considered the basis, and then we use the projection percentages. It may be completely vacant, in which case we'd have a very, very low assessment, and the growth percentages might not accurately reflect how much that specific property would benefit if it were fully redeveloped. What it does is it looks at properties by type and tries to assess improvements in that way. But yeah, it's to the degree that that is not taken into consideration in the downtown site, it is similarly not taken into consideration at the other two sites as well.
Mr. Alshire.
Councilmember, if I could just jump in with one point of clarification as you work your way through questions and comments. Site A and B at the Municipal Stadium sites were identified by Rodney and me when Mayor and Council had expressed some interest in December at looking at what would be the alternatives at the existing sites. So those weren't sites identified by Ripken, they were ones that we gave to Ripken along with the hospital site. So just so you know, Patrick and Dan did identify A and B as sites, or let's use this portion of Hager Park.
Right.
That came from Rodney and me as two alternatives.
Thanks, Bruce.
Right, well, I wasn't accusing you, I was just trying to point out factual.
No, I didn't think there was any accusation, but I think they were just a little uncomfortable maybe thinking that they'd been ones that identified those two alternative sites, and that they came from city staff back in December.
We have no horse in this race, as it were. None of these are our plans. We're just taking a look at them.
Go ahead.
Good suggestion by staff. As you're probably aware, I've read the original report as well as this one. And for me, I think that as the mayor had alluded for so long, it is good to have something to compare, your thought process to, that it's not simply one location. And for me, reading sort of between the lines of the report, not to be meant negatively, at least for myself, I was able to come up with some conclusions. The first of which, in review of the original report and the subsequent environmental information on the downtown site, that site has, for me, been excluded from, a horse in the race, so to speak. There are merits of that just don't make it work for me, which left me with sort of these three locations, and I was disappointed that the MELP property. The 10 or 11 acres there, as we demolished Melp, wasn't considered because I like the theme of a stadium along the Antietam Creek, and not just, sort of a personal, planning preference. But it wasn't included in the report, and that's fine. I understand, the aesthetic ramifications of entering between two power substations, not being the most pleasing. So in review of the report, for me it came down to two options. And the reason that I removed the option of redevelopment of the existing site is there's only so many times you can be told in a report that you are fighting against Mother Nature before you realize you're fighting unsuccessfully against Mother Nature. And when I think Eric Dykey sent us a report where in 1934, within a 6-week time frame, the city completely relocated that drainage area into a culvert, which we now know as a run, to build a stadium. And that environmental nature has simply tried to push itself back to where it would like to be, the 80 years hence. So that left me, as I think Councilmember Munson alluded, which was two viable sites, the hospital site and the alternative B, as you noted. And a couple of things I was disappointed in. One is the linkage that you have in here between A and B, because I see B as a very different proposal than A. In other words, I see the site on the west side of the run much differently than I do on B, or on the east side. And so a couple of those things that I did not agree with was this walkable scale, simply because the report in my mind didn't take into account things like the demolition of Melp and the redevelopment potential of the hospital property, of the larger volume of hospital property, and sort of juxtaposing itself in between those two locations, and that redevelopment potential that can exist. Because for me, I look at it in a larger area and say, you've got the hospital, available for redevelopment under private marketable property development. You've got the Melp for demolition. You have the area out Eastern Boulevard on both sides, as well as going out Cleveland, I guess it is, to the Venice Inn property, which a great portion was recently demolished, and so I saw it as a bigger area, and alternative B sort of fitting in the middle of it. So I think walkable is a questionable component to measure at this early stage when you have all of those other things yet to be considered. I also did not agree with including the industrial component or the breakup of the industrial component as being a con, if you will, in Site B, because frankly speaking, I think the city needs to ask that question of whether industrial is an appropriate use to continue at this location, given the redevelopment potential of hospital property and demolition of Melp. It feels like we are de-industrializing that area, and this is a step just in that additional direction. And I think it speaks to the mayor's issue of becoming more environmentally sound in that location and in its uses. And the other was the assessment evaluation comps. I mean, whether you take zoning or property or what have you, the reality is 15 years ago, no one would have expected the paper processing plant to be built on that property. So to try and figure out exactly what the next quarter-mile radius of properties are going to be developed as is like trying to guess how successful the shopping center that was Ames, that is Aldi's, that evolves over time. And the other item of this lack of new development, again, I think ties into that hospital issue. I was disappointed that Melp wasn't factored in the process, and I was also a little disappointed that in your parking analysis, as sort of a local that has been to the games for so long, it didn't factor into all those parking pieces that folks use now. I guess this is the Verizon parking lot, across from Hager Park that is widely used, and sort of some of those other areas. And that left me with looking at Site B being, at least for me, the preferred location, because I think it does have the most ample site area. It is 3 times the size of the proposed hospital location. It is a true change of use of the property, and frankly, for the better, as that neighborhood, does change. It keeps the hospital property in a redevelopment, marketable, taxable, potential, and then ties itself into that possibility. It has good linkage to the old stadium, as you've shown over Town Run, and I think there's a way to redevelop that and tie it into the demolition of Melp. It's already flat. I mean, that is just such an understated advantage. It has many good access points, and it also has the most opportunity for parking, and frankly, most relatively cheap parking. We don't have to maintain a parking deck that is 40 couple years old now, the hospital deck, and it gives you parking in both sort of directions for that increased access. It also has greater space within the existing neighborhood for events, because you have parking in both directions. You have that stadium in the middle. How you're going to launch, fireworks and do all those types of large events in a more confined space doesn't seem to be as a conducive alternative. It also avoids Town Run and the other topographic, topo issues. And it has the possibility of, environmental loading tax credits, of returning the area to a more green nature, and therefore you get TMDL credits that are an actual benefit and have an actual measurable financial benefit to them. And for me, the things that worked against the hospital site is while you do cite it was a hospital at one time, and therefore it should be able to handle the volume, the reality is when the hospital was there, it wasn't getting 2,000 cars at one time. It was getting 20 cars every half hour over the course of a day. And so I think that the accessibility of going down that side street as you get next to Sheetz and McDonald's and CVS there operates much differently when you have 2,000 cars trying to get into the area than 20 cars trying to get to the former hospital use. And so I didn't agree that the access is overly good. For me, I didn't review this report as having some necessity to tie itself to the A&E district. If that is the impetus in which we have to measure this ability for this project to succeed, then for me I would question why we would do the project, because frankly that entity existed well before the A&E district was created, has had some success in that process, and must be able to stand to some degree on its own merit if we're to take that level of investment on. And then the other thing is I didn't see any picture like I saw here of how you plan to fit the actual stadium on the hospital property. So I'd be interested to see how it would actually be positioned, because it isn't just a ball field there. I mean, you've got buildings and things around it, and I'd be interested to see, because as much as I love the fact that it's at the top of a hill and you sit 30 feet up and see all around you, I'm not certain you can fit the project on that piece of property. So that was my review of the report.
Thank you. We have not heard from this side of the table.
If there's one thing I learned from our experience, last administration, is I have an opinion from what I've seen of these sites, which I think would be the most preferable. I think we can all agree that A is just not a workable solution. I would like to hear the Suns. That's essentially what the stadium is all about. I'd like to hear their feelings, for instance, whether, having heard about their parking concerns downtown, what their parking concerns may be at the hospital. But much more importantly than hearing from the Suns, the lesson that we should have all learned from the last administration is, before we decide what we think is the best location for this facility, we should listen to our citizens and hear what they think is the best location for this facility. I believe when all is said and done, it's my guess that you're going to hear the citizens surrounding the hospital not real impressed with that location. And I think the reason you're going to hear that more than anything is when we get into the reality that we're getting into, which is financing. I mean, when we talk about downtown, and I'm not trying to sell downtown, I understand that that's really not on the table. But when we talk about that, and perhaps more so also with item B, you're dealing with, I think, certainly downtown, a lot more commercial property than residential. The hospital site, it appears that we're dealing with a substantial amount of residential property. And our whole concept here is essentially that we're hoping everybody who lives adjacent to this property have their taxes increased because their assessments are going to go up. I mean, let's say the way it is. That's the theory. Now, I don't necessarily ascribe to the fact that residential real estate assessments are in reality going to go up, like I would ascribe to the theory that commercial real estate values are going to go up. And I would say two things, and to compare those, when we say we're comparing apples to apples. In the downtown site, we're dealing with condemned properties that essentially have peaked out at about the lowest valuation assessment they can be. They're condemned, they're not occupied, or they're parking lots. At these other sites, we're dealing with properties that aren't at the lowest conceivable assessments. They're at a reasonable assessment, they're occupied, and there is a great argument that some who were in Summit and some who live around the hospital are going to say, geez, putting a stadium across the street from my house is not going to increase the value of my property. It's going to decrease it. Whether that's true or not true isn't nearly as relevant as the concept that we are going to try to sell to the folks that live on three sides of the hospital is, for all intents and purposes, we want to make it essentially a special taxing district. Because what we're saying is we anticipate with the advent of the stadium that their property values are going to go up substantially differently than the property values outside of that area. And I think from that perspective, if I were living there and I were finding out, and especially if I didn't like the thought of a stadium and then found out that not only was the stadium going to go there, but the taxes are going to go up, I would think we'd find community opposition to that. I've already heard that from some folks. There's ways to deal with that, and that's to say that's not fair, and that residents that live in that area shouldn't be in a, quote, special taxing district, and that everybody should share equally in the cost of this project. The hospital site is a very nice site to think about putting on for a lot of reasons. I suspect that when we're done hearing from the citizens, it seems to me the overwhelming comment I got from the citizens were twofold that were opposed to the stadium downtown. And that's either on-site or out on the interstate. Those were the two main themes you heard, either rebuild it where it is or out on the interstate. I've made it clear that as a city council member, I have no desire to be responsible for building a stadium out on the fringes of our community. You know, I think if I were a county commissioner and landowners, you know, I look out at out there by the outlets, and it seems to me, boy, talking about a synergy, but that's for all those people to deal with, not us. I think B is probably going to be the one that the citizens think is the appropriate one. And then the question becomes very simple. How do you fund it, whether it's A, B, downtown, or the hospital? How do you fund it? And the recognition now, although Kristen, you may be right, there may be more development that can occur out in that area that I'm giving credit for, out in the, if we did the Hager Park, the Plan B. There may be much more there that we can get developed, but I would like us to do it. I think that in order to get it done, that there's a good reason, Mayor, that we have scheduled what we have scheduled today, which is not one major theme, but two. Because I think in order to accomplish this goal, we're going to have to do it in conjunction with the first presentation we had today. And I am supportive. I supported the downtown stadium site. I will support any site that our citizens will support that we can get funding for. I think it would be a wonderful thing to maintain the Suns here. And the only last thing I would ask, and not at tonight's meeting, but at some stage of the game, can we publicly explain to everybody, including me, why a rock formation is impossible to solve? I mean, every time we talk about municipal stadium, we're told it can't be done because there's a rock formation in left field. And you ask somebody that, and they say, what about dynamite? You ask somebody about that, they say, what about 50 dump truck loads of soil? I mean, it just, and I'm not trying to sell that we rebuild a municipal stadium, but I would like to have an explanation of why a rock formation cannot be leveled out either by getting rid of the rock or adding soil on top. And I'm assuming there's a very good reason, because everybody who knows what they're doing says it can't be done. So that's my take.
Good, John said he didn't say that.
Ms. Nye.
Well, I'm the hard-headed one. That's what I told you guys. I'm still looking at the old site. I still think that the old site is workable. And there is somebody somewhere that can pull this all together. I'm not in favor of taking away Hager Park, but I am in favor of somehow utilizing the spring works. However, that can all work. I just feel that that's the area where it should be. And there's more people now complaining and griping that the stadium is even back on the paper. So that's exactly what I'm looking for. So, Mr. Mayor, the tiebreaker may be you.
Well, I don't think so. I think we're not here to make a decision tonight.
Oh, I'm not saying
So
down the road,
first of all,
because
I just wanna mention
I'm staying where I'm staying.
Well, let me ask you this, because I think the key in that area is town run. So, I mean, I've said it many times before, I don't favor building over top of our waterways. We've done that enough with Hamilton Run and Long Meadow Shopping Center and all these other places. I think we need to unbury our waterways and make them public amenities and not continue to bury them. So how would you address that particular subject? Mr. Brubaker, thank you for raising your hand.
That's a 9-acre site. We're already, the hospital is a 6-acre site. It's 9 acres without town run. So clearly, if you're talking not rebuilding from the ground up, you have enough room. If you have enough room on a 6-acre site, you have enough room on a 9-acre site, even without going over town run. I mean, clearly that can be done. So that's the answer to your question, Patty. It can be done.
Well, here's my...
We're just assuming there that we have to go over town run. You just start and make left field where it is and just use more of the parking lot. And if you need more parking, you have to do it somewhere else, just like you have to do it at every one of these sites.
Right.
But when people say they favor the existing site, they all think it can be done for $12 million.
No, I don't.
And that, I mean, we could
They're not saying
remodel the
that.
existing stadium
No.
for $12 million.
They're not saying that to
and
me
that
per
might be the
se, but you know, the existing stadium is what everybody has said to me.
Yeah.
Now, hey, it may cry foul after tonight's meeting, I don't know. But personally, and I know a lot of other people, this is exactly where their stance
If you
is.
can squeeze it onto a 6-acre
You know,
site, you
that's
can
the thing.
build it, rebuild it at a 9-acre
Right.
site.
Well,
And you can't tell me.
it certainly
I
sounds
have
like-
experience, you can't tell me you can't do that.
And it sounds like the parking situation is worse everywhere but the Plan B, and parking was a major issue with the downtown site.
But that's in Plan B because it uses Hager Park.
Now you're gonna have to talk about.
Don't turn it on before that.
It uses Hager Park. It uses Hager Park, and the parking goes over on where the existing municipal
Right.
stadium
So it
is.
could be done.
So we essentially use up a park.
So we get back to
That
the
makes it
issue
easier.
of the alleged immovable rock.
Right.
I'd like to know why you can't fix a rock.
And once again, the stadium is in the budget, and it makes the 2015 budget right now unfundable without a tax increase. And that's still with a $9 million funding gap. That's even, it's not funded. Even funding a city share for what we're talking about raises taxes, not next year, but the year after. We issue bonds next year, it hits all the subsequent budgets.
You cannot
And so, you know, we're here talking about something
That we
that
don't have
I'm
any
not
funding
sure
for
we
it.
can do.
the issue.
And it's not, again, nothing you guys were just asked to run a model, you know, based on
No, it becomes a
something.
funding
That
issue.
if it's a $30 million stadium, which is, when you build a stadium and related parking and so on and so forth, it's gonna turn out to be, right? That's a fair estimate. Then it's very tough to finance it, and there's still that private sector funding gap
That we don't
has
have.
never been addressed and never made up. Grove Stadium had a benefactor, Ripken Stadium, Aberdeen had a benefactor, the Shorebirds had a benefactor, everybody had private contributions. We haven't seen hide nor hair except for the one that
Right.
did not come through.
And if we build on
So
site,
we
we
need
aren't
to
going
be
to get
realistic
any
here.
realistic bang out of any tax assessment increases, right? I mean, we've had a stadium there forever, and you would not anticipate that suddenly we're going to get tax increases. So, again, like all the other places, it's all a matter of where do you get the money, and are citizens willing to have a tax increase in order to build a stadium?
And the way I look at it, I think we have a majority that's eliminated downtown. That's the only place where there's some potential
To
to
recoup your
truly
money.
recover the money. That's the way I see it.
In the proposal for Hager Park, the B proposal, there are a bunch of storage places there, storage areas. Would they have to be eliminated? Do you know where I'm talking about?
I believe.
Yeah, they all
Is this
go.
the, you're talking about the city, oh, I'm sorry, the
It's a private,
the
they're
private
privately
storage
owned.
company. Yeah, they are.
Would they be eliminated? Would they?
Forsyth. You talking Forsyth?
No, the mini storage,
No, mini
across
storage.
from
Mini
Stadium
storage.
Tavern,
Okay.
yeah, in
well,
front of the Springworks.
Yeah,
Yeah,
in front of the
One of the
spring.
spring
yeah.
works.
More or less.
It looks like a parking lot on
Yeah.
the
Okay.
concept to me.
And the spring works would have to go too.
In this concept, yes.
So,
Actually, in both A and B.
Okay.
well,
I don't want to.
you know, I guess Councilwoman and I just mentioned a very difficult issue in that there are a lot of people in that community that have great affection for the park.
Yeah, and I would
They don't
not.
want the park disturbed.
And I said no to taking away the park. Did you hear me when I said that? I said Springworks, okay?
Right.
You can get around that somehow. I don't care how you do it, but you can get around it.
Here's a question that has not been raised.
Well,
which
wait a
is-
minute, I'm not, so,
ahead.
so if they don't, it seems that if we're limited ourselves to these two proposals now, that they can be unhappy with construction on Hospital Hill or unhappy with taking away part of the park. There's going to be some big decisions that have to be made by the community.
Well, Plan A does not take away part of the park.
Pardon me?
Plan A,
No, Plan A doesn't,
take away
but it certainly doesn't sound like it's a workable plan.
I guess I still don't understand
I
that.
mean,
I'll
the
have to-
ball team has to have some place to play. You can't tear down a stadium when the ball team doesn't have an alternative place to play.
Well, they themselves originally proposed renovating it years ago. I mean, how would that work? I'm sorry, Don, I
mean, I
guess we have to
don't-
work that out.
Can't answer that question, but I'm just making,
Well,
I mean, then we
guess,
shouldn't have had it as a site. If they can't do that, then we shouldn't even be considering it.
Well, you know, when this study was going to be done, and I said, you know, I really, really, really don't want to get involved in this. And my last word was, and guys, don't take offense to this, is that, gee, I'd like to have the truth for once. And it seems as though when the first study was done, everything was the focus of downtown. It wasn't a matter of looking at really any place else. I mean, there was just like, okay, no, it's just not going to go anywhere. And when I said that and this came out, And what I saw is that when you, Mayor, said, I'd like to see it at the hospital site, that the more focus was the hospital site. And I still say, and I feel, and by no means am I an engineer, architect, but I've talked to too many people that says, yes, it can be done. So, you know, I mean, that's the thing.
Well, I'll just say what I think. You know, I'm still open-minded.
Oh, no,
for
but
any site.
I'm just
I want
saying.
to see this get done.
Well, you
I
know.
think the citizens are looking for us to provide leadership. It seems like we have some fractured opinions here about where things should go, and we have some consensus building to do. In looking at the data that's been provided to me in the last week or two, I favor the hospital site for a number of reasons. First and foremost, there's one single property owner to deal with. While that might not be our favorite entity to have to deal with because of past wounds and all the lawsuits and everything else, I think that's water under the bridge. And I think all those things can be overcome. I think it's the cleanest site. We don't have to worry about environmental contaminants like we would if we looked at either the downtown, formerly proposed downtown site, or if you're talking about Spring Works or even the MELP facility, that property. So it's the cleanest site. My answer to anybody who says, there's a rock formation or it's at the top of a hill, my answer is if we can put a man on the moon, we can build a stadium on top of a hill, or we can get rid of a rock. That is my answer to that quandary. Another reason I think that the hospital is a good location is because we've known that this is going to have to be a property that's redeveloped over the years. Sharon Disk and the HNDP has worked with the hospital on various concepts. They've looked at retail, commercial, they've looked at residential. None of those things work. This is a site, to me, it seems like a perfect compromise between something in the East End and something in what other people consider the core of downtown. Because it perhaps is on that fringe, it has plenty of ancillary parking. I mean, so there are just a number of reasons why my thought process leads to that being a good site to consider. Am I married to it? Am I committed to it? No, I'm open to any other idea. I think one of the big problems with the current site, again, is the flooding, the issue of town run. I think the issue of where the Suns would play if we go with something like Concept A would be something we have to talk with the Suns about. I think, from what I've heard from the ownership of the Suns is they don't care where a stadium is either. Right. They just want a facility that's safe for their players, that is conducive to their mission of player development for the organization, to provide the maximum amount of entertainment value for the patrons. I think those are the considerations that they have. They're not married to any concept either. So I think, I appreciate the work because I do think having alternatives, having options is the way to go, and we can have a healthy discussion and a debate about any kind of location. I do think that the citizen input is going to be very important. We've scheduled time tonight to get that very feedback, and I'm going to be quiet now and open up my ears and listen. And unless anyone else on the council has any questions for our presenters, I'm going to ask them to perhaps stay at the table while we ask citizens. How are we going to do this? Do we have a microphone for folks to come up?
Eric or Peggy to bring a microphone out. Maybe we use the stand. Is that the easiest way to do it?
Sure, and I would just ask if anyone, any citizen in attendance tonight has anything to say or ask
Podium, right.
of the team, that you just simply come forward, state your name, and I'm sorry? Oh yeah, but our standard, and typically we do not have citizen comments during work sessions, but I felt, and I think the rest of the council thinks, that this is a good opportunity for citizens, for us, for you to hear straight from the people who gave us this report, and ask any questions you want, make any comments you feel would be necessary. So certainly this would be a good opportunity. You're always welcome to stay for our regular session and when we have citizen comment time. So anybody? Janet? Okay. You don't want to be the first?
Dave Smith back there is interested.
Yes. Please.
Good evening, I'm Tony DeBora. As you know, I'm one of the partners of the Suns, and so I wanted to talk a little bit about some information that's been discussed here directly, so that we can put that on the table. I guess to start about the situation in left field, which we paid to have a study done. The Suns did ourselves, and I think in the back of my car I have that subsurface topology. We actually tried to get rid of it when we laser graded the field a couple of years ago. And what happened, fortunately people started digging at the base of the wall, and we found out that the base of the wall was only 18, the foundation was only 18 inches deep. So to laser grade properly, we would have to go below the foundation of the wall. So, and that would create a whole chain reaction of issues with the existing location. Concept A is problematic for us because of the time scale. I mean, we need places to play, and if you look around the country, it's very rare. In fact, I don't know of in the modern era, any situations where a new stadium is built on the exact site of the old stadium. If you look in the major leagues, you look at Yankee Stadium, you look in Philadelphia, you look in Detroit, Chicago at Comiskey, the new Comiskey, and so forth. So everything is built next to the old stadium or nearby. So concept B makes a lot of sense. It also creates an opportunity to spread out a little bit and create a better venue for the community. And more parking. Concept A, I believe, had a parking deck,
Yeah, concept A has a parking deck in this concept down,
which,
right down here.
from our point of view, other than cost, you know, I mean, the mayor is correct. I mean, we need to have a state-of-the-art facility to play that's comparable, you know, that meets minor league standards. So that's our main concern. I believe personally that that block is a special area because of its size, and I think that, I'm familiar with your methodology, and I think it's okay, but as was alluded to earlier, I think Councilman Alshire, for one, it doesn't really take into account the opportunity for brand new development. And that block, I mean, for instance, if a hotel were to be put kind of where the outfield is of the existing Concept A, and let's say a franchise restaurant on the point there where the existing parking is, you know, you start doing that, you do things across the street, somebody comes in and wants to build a water park on the backside of the Melt, for instance. I'm not saying that that's reality, but I do know of people that have discussed things like that. Then you have a whole different economic impact scenario. I do disagree personally that the impact of the stadium has already been felt, because this is really an exceptional situation because the stadium is 80 years old. There really isn't much, other than perhaps the stadium grill, there really isn't that much going on. People haven't built market rate housing and things because it's next to a really neat new ballpark, things like that, which I believe, my interpretation of your methodology is that's one of the biggest bangs for your buck is, for instance, around the hospital, you would have the potential, as has happened in the phenomenon that's happened in other places where older buildings, even in Greenville, there's I think it was an abandoned warehouse that got turned into wonderful market rate housing and offices and things like that. So, you know, that's just a comment about that. In sum, we need to get it done. I would advise us to, as a body, to try to do more simultaneously so that we don't have to speculate about the funding model, we don't have to speculate about engineering costs, and we don't end up going down a path that leads to a dead end or leads to heartache and things like that. So I would urge the mayor and council to move forward on all fronts with these sites to see how we can reach a resolution. Also, a couple of years ago, we came forward with a plan to renovate Municipal Stadium. It was an idea. It was an idea that was subsequently nixed by our majority partner, frankly. I mean, we thought, this is Hagerstown, this is gonna be the most realistic way of keeping baseball in Hagerstown, just something. But it turned out it was neither here nor there. It might have been accomplished in one off-season, but it was very risky, but it was very modest. And it didn't really accomplish the goals of the Suns, and I don't believe it accomplished the goals of the city. So we took that off, everyone took that off the table. There was a joint meeting with the mayor and council at the time and with the county commissioners. There wasn't a lot of excitement. So we pitched it and it failed.
All due respect, that's not true. In all due respect, you pitched it. You told us it had to be an executive session because you had to get the Springworks property, and you asked us specifically to take no further actions until you got back to us with regards to the purchase and the project. And the next thing this body saw was an article in the paper about going to Winchester because this city wasn't doing anything. And I'm just not going to sit here and hear you say that we rejected it. We sat and waited for the Suns to come back to us. And only when we had an executive committee meeting with Bruce Quinn, with you present, when we said, what about that project, were we told that project was a no-go. But no, and that's one of the reasons the city of Hagerstown took no actions, is because at that meeting, we were specifically asked by the Hagerstown Suns, don't do anything. We need to negotiate the Springworks, and we'll get back. Well, and as I say, the next thing we heard was that Hagerstown was doing nothing and the Suns were negotiating with Winchester.
Well, with all due respect, that was one aspect of it, but the other aspect was that everybody said, we'll go down to Annapolis and get the money and then we'll talk. I remember that distinctly, because I told that to many people afterwards. And when I say we rejected, we collectively rejected that concept. If it was such a good concept, it would have been picked up by someone. We didn't. We ended up deciding that that wasn't a good idea. It wasn't good enough for people to come back to us and say, hey, what happened to that? Come on, guys. And if you had, we would have said, we decided that that's not really feasible. It doesn't meet our mission.
Well, again, I think a lot of those things are history. And my goal is to keep looking forward and to find a way forward that is workable for not only the city, the Suns, the community, the taxpayer. Mr. Metzner did mention the idea that much of the what would be paid for, used to pay for the stadium would be increased property values. And I guess my only observation would be that if we were really concerned about not increasing people's property taxes, I mean, one of my goals, I think, that we all share is that we need to find ways to increase property values without raising taxes. So I do think that we need to find those investments and make those investments that increase the values of people's properties. Yes, my property increasing in value is a double-edged sword. Certainly I want to get a return on my investment if I ever go to sell my house, but at the same time, if my property doubles in value, I'm going to have to pay more taxes. That's a given, and that is a double-edged sword that I think we have to deal with, it seems, no matter where we build a stadium. Hopefully it will have that effect, and I don't think the stadium is the only kind of investment we need to make, but certainly, like I said before, I think we're worth it as a community to make, whether it's a $20 million investment or $25 or $30 million or $50 million, if that's what we end up spending on everything that we're considering. I think we are worth it as a community. We need to find a way to make these investments that is wise and that has the community's support. Mr. Brubaker.
Just a word to the wise, I made those very same arguments to those people on Summit Avenue in the downtown stadium last fall. The signs in all the yards were for you guys. So I'll just make that comment. So why should the people, as they said at the fairgrounds, why should those people be different than the people in the north end? Why should the people around the hospital site be different than Summit Avenue? That's all I say. Because I made those exact same arguments many
Mr. Mayor,
times.
if I may,
Yes,
one
sir.
thing perhaps for Mr. Taylor to clarify, I don't know if he can now or come back, but I think there's a difference when we talk about increased assessment, and I'm out of my strength here, but I have been looking at these reports quite a bit. I think it bears digging into a little bit the difference between if I have a house in that impact area that I've lived in for a while or I've owned, and I convert that to market rate to 2 or 3 condominiums or something like that, upscale, that has an impact on its value versus if I've lived in the house there for many years and I just stay there. We talk about overall assessment, the property values increasing, but there may be a difference enough so that people who aren't planning to do something, I mean, they have potential, because if the people on both sides of me have done something really cool, and their value has gone up, I guess my value is going to go up on potential, but probably not as much as the people who have actually built condos.
Well, yeah, and just to speak to that a little bit, as the property values increase, for someone who is not changing the use of their home, they continue to live there as their primary residence, the amount of tax that they actually have to pay on that assessment is capped at a fixed percentage per year.
5%.
And that is reflected in the model as well and in these pieces. So in the heavily residential districts, if you assume that a certain amount stays residential with owner occupants, that there's actually less revenue coming into the city because of that, but the property values are increasing and the actual money into the city is capped.
Please.
Tony, could you
Thank you.
could you comment on my remark that what would the team do about not having a stadium to play in for a season? I mean, you can't build a stadium in the wintertime.
It would be a financial calamity. It would be
So A doesn't
unsustainable.
work in that regard.
In my opinion, it's a non-starter.
I mean, yeah,
And
okay.
we wouldn't be the first people, based on what other people have done around the country. You just can't do it.
A assumes a ready and willing seller, Springworks.
Well, B has the Springworks sold too.
Yeah,
B
but,
counts on the Springworks.
and at one time, and this was when all of
That's
this
just
was
a-
going on, that's when they decided, well, gee, maybe we will go ahead and sell this, because I actually had a figure, okay? It's just like with Forsyth, there was a figure there as well, so
It is on the market.
never say that it's a no-go. you
There's a
know?
sign
It's
on
been
the property. Yes,
It's
sir.
been on the market,
Yep.
yes. And then when things are being speculated, that's when they decide that they may go ahead and up the ante. But it all depends.
Are there any, while I'm here, I don't know if anyone else has any questions for me.
I just remind everybody, once again, the stadium is not funded, that even with the city funding only a part of it, we have no commitment from the county to fund anything but a downtown effort. And even with all that, we don't have that private funding. We may be able to work a naming rights deal with the Suns, but that only is maybe 20% of the gap that exists in funding the capital requirements for a new
I'd like to
stadium.
add, when we say no private funding, the Suns are funding part of it. We're a private entity. So this is, in effect, a public-private partnership.
But not enough to pay the capital for that stadium.
Well, I would ask that the due diligence is performed on the funding model with all haste, because I think it's time. I think we have a lot of information about that.
And I think we should clarify, because I was at the county meeting when that decision was made. The county did not decide to fund only a downtown stadium. That was not the vote taken by that board. That board took a vote to treat the city of Hagerstown exactly like it treats every other municipality, and recognizing that it would provide the 911 center at no cost to this municipality like it provides for the other 8 municipalities as an effort of fairness. It wasn't a $400,000 contribution to a downtown stadium. It was a vote to exercise fairness.
I would say that,
Two of us were there, and I think we may have a different.
Well, I would say that's
I-
accurate if we're not paying them $400,000 this year, are we?
We're not.
We're not.
We're not.
So
So
they're
as
not-
long as they could,
All I said is it's not guaranteed, that's all.
The community, I believe, has one of the key ingredients, and it's very good. We have the pros and cons of key sites. The two missing ingredients are costs, getting some firm estimates on costs, and how much does the community have? What's the real budget to pay for it?
Financing.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's needed.
Yeah, it's that other partnership.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
There's a man by the name of Dave Smith back there who had his hand up.
Please approach the podium and tell us your name and ask us anything or comment.
My name's David Smith, and I live about a half block from the old hospital on Hager Street. My family's lived there for 90 years, so I know a little bit about the history of that area. I will have to take exception to one thing you said. The old hospital was a very quiet neighbor for us. It was very rare that I ever heard rock bands and fireworks and 1,000 people cheering coming from the hospital, but it was a good neighbor, and it was quiet. My problem is with Plan B, and that is the taking of Hager Park. That's an area that is widely used by the people in that end of town. We don't have another park in that end, like Pangborn Park and the city park. There is no other park for the children and the people to use in that neighborhood. Nothing that's old and established and like that. It has pavilions, and it has children's things, and it has an area with old trees. And basically what you'd be doing is you'd be just eliminating with this plan that whole park. I mean, there'd be virtually nothing left. And also it looks to be on the plan like you'd also be taking out a historic structure. Part of the Forsyth property is the Hager Mill, which is, I don't know if you're familiar with it, it's probably at least early 19th century. There is a plaque down there. That would call for the elimination of that.
I don't think that's quite accurate, though, because in my discussions with our city engineer and early on, that was identified as a very key component of that park, and that would
good.
not be.
See, it
it would be
appears on there.
incorporated, I think, into whatever structure
Yes,
would be.
I don't see it on there. That's what I was saying.
Yeah.
Are these, let me ask you this, are these Plan A and B, are these like etched in stone that there's no modifications
No.
on these? It's the way I kind of got the idea, because maybe I could propose something, a Plan C. You don't know what you're going to get when you just move the ballpark right over a few hundred feet. I mean, you might run into some of the same problems with that location that you did where you are now, and just have eliminated a park and wound up with the same thing you had before. Now, I'm looking at another idea. Have you considered the idea of building the ballpark itself, the stadium itself, north of there on that corner lot there where the parking lot is, and also where the municipal garage is? Is that a possibility to put it there? Looks to me like you'd have as much room. That way you could keep the park and use the old stadium for a parking space.
Certainly
I'm happy to
consider it.
answer that, only to say that we haven't looked at it because we weren't asked to, but I don't, I don't see any reason. Yeah.
Yeah.
They didn't go on, it wasn't that.
I mean, that would just be sort of a modification of Plan A and B. You have the municipal stadium, yet you'd move the park itself over there, the playing field, over to that corner.
Can I ask you a question? Are you opposed to a stadium at the hospital site? Because I didn't.
I don't like the idea of a stadium there. I think it would adversely affect those of us who live in that neighborhood. Also, I think you're very much boxing yourself in by building it there. I know a lot of people, I talked to the gentleman before when I was at your last meeting here, the man from Sora, the other gentleman who was here, and I was telling him, he wasn't too familiar. I said, the configuration of that land is nothing like it used to be. And those of you here who remember, before the emergency room and additions were made, that land was quite different than it is now. The area in the front on King Street was almost level with the street, and then it gradually sloped up to a hill there, but it was nothing like it is now. And also, I pointed out to him, I said, one of the things you might run into down on Mill Street, he wasn't familiar with, that there was a stone quarry down there at one time. Most people don't remember that, right next to the Forsyth property. What potentially that could be a problem? Because he asked me what they filled it in with. I claim I said I was about 2 or 3 at the time. I don't quite remember. Wasn't paying much attention. But I would just say, I like, as a citizen, I like the Plan A. You know, like I have to agree with Lou Metzner. I don't know why you can't do something about that. I just don't understand how we can't move rocks, do things. But I just think it would be a terrible thing for that end of town to take out that park, which is widely used by the citizens. A lot of people use it for picnics, organizations, as well as children in that area. A lot of the children who go over to the Little League, which is right next to this property, the American Field, like to go in there and play at the same time. So I think that would be a shame to take away that park. That's basically all I have to say.
Yes, please. David, suppose your Plan C wasn't viable. Now, the option becomes the park or B. I mean, you represent the community. You've been there a long, long time, huh? What's the better alternative for the community?
I would hate to see B taken. I would hate to see the park taken. I mean, I think almost anything but that.
Okay.
Because that park is quite an asset to the community. There's no other green area like that. And it was interesting, I just read something interesting the other day, or heard in the news, I forget where I heard it. They did a study that showed that green areas like that are very good for cities. Having open areas, they have a great impact on the psychology, not just the economics, but the psychology of the people in the area, to have places like that to go. And like I said, there is just nothing like that in that end of town.
Mr. Mayor, while the witness is still there, while the person's still there, excuse me. Using a bit of loose terminology. I think have we eliminated the downtown site? Because you're not giving the man even an option to say that. And so I guess if we're absolutely close to that, I've got a real problem. I'd like to still be able to argue that site. I think it has clear advantages. If we've eliminated that, like I hear, okay, Kristen's from, well, you have.
I've eliminated it.
Okay, so we have 3 votes against it, okay? Now the question is the cost benefit of investing in the stadium at any of these sites worth it?
Yeah.
I would only like to say that thanks for the proposal of site.
Sir, thank you. I was trying to give you another option. I failed.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know, it seems like the downtown site seems to have a lot of problems too. There was an awful lot of
Opposition.
opposition to
Yeah.
that from the cities.
Including him.
Opposition.
I just want to say thanks because it gives you more food for thought in that vicinity. I mean, you look at that and say, okay, really all you got to acquire is a parking lot because the city owns most of the other area up in that upper left corner.
The other thing to consider.
Thanks for coming in and making those comments
Yeah.
to make us think more. You know,
I do appreciate
about-
that as well. And one of the things that I think we have to consider is if you're going to take away parkland to construct a stadium, then the question is there anywhere in that area you can replace that open space so that you're not taking away a net amenity, but you're perhaps reconfiguring it around the same area? Certainly, if you look at Site B and you're taking away Hager Park, you've got all that land on top of the hill, Hospital Hill, because it certainly doesn't seem retail, commercial, or residential is going to work there. So maybe that's a good alternative location for a park. I'm just putting out ideas here to keep the conversation going. We have another citizen that would like to come forward. Please.
Hi, my name's Julie Rivette.
Hi,
and
Julie.
Most of you know me. I live on Summit Avenue in downtown Hagerstown. And one of the things...
Can you speak up just a little bit, please?
I probably need to get closer. One of the things that I was hearing Tony speak on was he doesn't want to get disrupted with his ball team, and I kind of really get that. So one of the questions that popped into my head was, and maybe you all would have this data, how many months does it take to build a multi-use sports and entertainment center versus just redeveloping a basic stadium so they can play for sure, and then maybe try to plan down the road to do a multi-use thing in stages?
Yeah, the construction logistics come into play. The fastest I've seen a stadium developed is really an 18-month process, the fastest. There's some examples, the St. Louis Cardinals did this, where they built the majority of their stadium while still playing in their other stadium, and then immediately at the end of the season, they knocked down their other stadium and built the last little bit. And they were able to do that, but I think it was 80% or even more had been built, and then they built the last 20% in the off-season period. I'm not sure, depending on the configuration, exactly how those construction logistics would have to work on this project. I suspect, especially in Concept A, that it would be a very difficult thing to do because of how much overlaps with the current stadium. Would just be my gut reaction to that.
Right. And how long do you think it would take to just make it playable, at least make it so they don't have the issues that they have right now with the grass not growing right and not making it into a complete multi-use and sports entertainment center like within 18 months, but breaking it out and trying to do a phased approach with it?
Yeah, my sense is that the field itself and a lot of the stadium infrastructure is in need of a full replacement, and whether or not that's to go back to the rock issue, I'm not going to say it's not possible. It may not be financially prudent to blow out however many inches of stone, but assuming that can be done and would make sense to do financially, that type of renovation of just the field and maybe the immediate clubhouse area could probably be done within a year. I don't know what the impacts that would be, though. I honestly don't know in terms of whether that would give them the type of facility that they would want to have, or whether that would be a wise investment given whether additional things would need to be kind of redone if you pursued a multi-use center down the line. Whether you basically tear up the work that you did when you made that expansion or not. I just don't know the answer.
And one last question. Do you know of any stadiums in existence that has good numbers on how much a stadium can make off of historical aspects? Because I noticed one thing about his municipal stadium is they don't market that. And I think that when you move that, even if you move that footprint over into Hager's Park, that's a huge loss for the owners of the Suns, possibly, and or the city of Hagerstown, depending on how folks want to leverage that money. Because there's been quite a few Hall of Famers that have went through there, some that are still living, that they could bring back and,
Yep, and you're talking to a couple of guys who really do have a lot of appreciation for the historical piece of the game. We've worked on a lot of historical renovation, baseball stadium projects.
You could make like a walk of fame, bring back players like Willie Mays or Bryce Harper that's, really famous now, and, get their handprints and, not just create one small museum, but make the whole area a walking museum.
Yeah, so we do think that there is value to that, especially amongst the baseball fans. We have not seen a lot of that value reflected in the market. We don't see a lot of other people valuing it the way that we might value it as baseball fans. But there certainly is historical value to these stadiums being in place. They are best capitalized when there are really historic structures that people can see and kind of put their, say this is that stadium. I'm not convinced that Municipal Stadium, as it's configured, really has that type of iconic piece. Think Camden Yards warehouse type or a Wrigley Field.
Sure, I mean the structure's not there, but the place.
But I think so the history there.
When I think about baseball, I think about dirt in the field.
Yeah. And I honestly think that whether it's sat exactly how it sits or sat in any of these two other configurations, that historical component could be built into that without any difficulty at all, and that could be reflected.
Okay, all right, thank you. That's all I have.
Thanks, Julie. Would any other citizens? Janet, come on up. Introduce yourselves to everybody.
What?
Introduce yourselves to everybody in the viewing public, please.
Oh, yes. Janet Bartels. I live on South Mulberry Street. And I want to thank the gentleman who came in here and talked about Hager Park. I have been trying to work ever since the demise of C-Safe after-school programs and our Gardening with Children at getting new partners. And I've been working for months to try to work out a partnership with the Boys and Girls Club after-school program at Frederick Manor and the community garden at Hager Park. And first, there was the dog park idea. So I went to every dog park task force meeting. That you are going to be approving the dog park at Fairgrounds Park. Then I thought, okay, we'll talk about getting the community garden going there with the Boys and Girls Club as partner, met with Rodney and Junior about that, and then I come in here to talk about, and Kristen Alshar says, well, that's where the stadium's going to go. So, well, that's, yes, you did. And when I came in to talk to Penny before a meeting. And so I'm very frustrated with that because the garden, that is an historical park used by children, and it is also with and that one of the very, very necessary things in our neighborhood is food. And the idea not only is to do community gardening there, but to turn that into a food park. Let's plant all over the city, on all the alleys, on all the walkways, edible perennials, and have urban agriculture in this community, because the community and my neighborhood, since I have lived, the 8 years I have lived there, I do not see us affording any stadium at the costs that you're talking about. There is not the money or the resources in Hagerstown. And Virginia, my roommate on the duplex, has lived there for over 50 years. On South Mulberry Street. I've lived there over 8 years. And this is by far, this is the worst she's seen, what's happening to our neighborhood. And this is the worst I've seen. Our workforce house across the street, owned by a DC fireman, his wife, lived in by a son, is now vacant. We have graffiti on a house not next to me, but one down. We have a condemned house at the top of the street. We have another house over across the alley that is going for $30,000 to $40,000. I do not see, and walking down South Mulberry Street to Bester School to look at what's going on there. Now with Hager Park will be needed even more with the construction at Bester. Part of that playground is all fenced off. I just don't see where we're even talking about moving a stadium. What's the commitment from the Suns?
Big commitment.
You're going to stay? How much notice do you have to give before you move somewhere else?
30 years if we sign a 30-year lease.
Yep. Is that lease signed?
Let's limit the conversation
Okay.
between the audience. Yeah.
Okay, but interjected. Okay, what is our, if we build a stadium with taxpayer dollars, what's the commitment from, what are the guarantees? Do we build the stadium and then they sign the lease, or do they sign a lease so that we build the stadium? What about the idea of renovating the stadium as best we can, taking the spring works and putting a park there, too, like with Toby Mendez doing some of those historical sculptures that he's done for Fenway and Camden Yards. And what about Lou Metzner's idea of another team? I mean, shouldn't we be? I just do not see, with the economic realities of downtown neighborhoods in Hagerstown, of it happening. And a hospital, of course, I live right near a hospital site. Replacing the hospital with a stadium, to me, seems like a really cruel joke to all of us in that downtown neighborhood. For health care, I heard talk of they're putting health care down. They didn't leave their urgent care even down there. The only facility is a community-free clinic. And that certainly, a lot of the people in my neighborhood don't have insurance, so that certainly is that it keep operating and it take new patients, uninsured patients is what's needed in my neighborhood. So I don't see what's going on in that whole downtown neighborhood as being able to support any of this. And taking a park in an area that's never had a neighborhood first, never had neighborhood organization, never been polled or asked about it. What do we think? I think it's very sad.
Thank you, Janet.
Okay.
Yes, sir, please, come on up.
I didn't get a chance, I got here late, so I didn't get a chance to hear Tony speak. So I don't know if I'm gonna say anything different than what Tony says, but just to.
Can you please introduce yourself?
My
to
first
us?
name's Tim. My last name is Light, L-I-G-H-T. I represent the Physiocs. I also represent the family that owns Bonded Applicators and the Consolidated Freight Building across the street. I'm also a baseball aficionado, and I will disclose that I would say Tony and I are as close to each other as people could be without being blood relatives, with our families, our sons, everything. The same way with Peter over there. I've done a lot of work for his dad and with his dad. But what I want to talk about is the stadium. And I didn't, what is your name?
Dan.
Dan? Okay, and you're with the Ripken Group?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, I know Cal a little bit, did the baseball clinics up on the mountain, and I knew Big Cal, who drank a lot of beer with our buddy Jim here in Hagerstown. It was a head Oriole scout that moved Cal from third to shortstop. So I know a whole lot about baseball. So I'm gonna say a few things to give you my gist of the stadium. Yankee Stadium was sold out forever because it was the house that Ruth built. Everybody wanted to go there where Garrick played, Mickey Mantle, Maris, Yogi Bear. As soon as they built the new stadium, they're not sold out anymore. You know that. So I think you need to disclose that. Number two, Fenway. Fenway sold out all the time. They just had last week their first time in almost 10 years that they didn't sell out. Maybe even more, 12 years. They didn't sell out a game because of the economy a little bit. Well, how did they keep Fenway going all these years and play every year. They kept it going. They remodeled it, bang, bang, boom, boom, boom. Comiskey's the same way. Okay, I went to a lot of Suns games. A few years ago, I think I missed 5 games a year, the other year 6 games. People that come to this stadium love the old-time feel. They like being close to the action. They like being right there with the ball players. And I think that if you look at what the one lady was saying about Willie Mays playing here, he played his first game here. And just if I speak too quickly, slow me down. But Willie Mays' first experience in Hagerstown, as you well know, he went downtown and had to stay away from the team and stayed at where the Hagerstown car wash was, where the hotel used to be. And 3 of his teammates snuck in his bedroom window and slept on the floor because they were worried about him. His first night at our stadium, he hit 2 doubles and a homer. Nobody cheered. The second night, he hit 2 doubles and a homer, and he had a few cheers. Well, the Sunday game rolled around. He had 2 home runs. The whole place went ecstatic. So Willie Mays has a really good feeling about Hagerstown. I mean, he got a standing ovation. Jim Palmer played here. Okay, I'm a big Oriole lover. Okay, even though Tony's got the Nationals, that's the second best because of our proximity to draw people from D.C. to come and see the future Bryce Harpers. So, you know, we have that potential right there, and my feelings and what I think we should do with the stadium. The Physiocs are willing to finance this for the city themselves with about a $8,485 a month payment. You guys have the property with that for 10 years. It's your property. The same way goes across the street. So we can own all of that, go the whole way over to behind the Venice. We can get that property across the street for $495,000. We're the whole way over to Antietam. We have all our ingress and egress set up. We have a local company here that specializes in demolition and doing remediations on site, which could take down the old power plant and use all of that steel. We can reuse it. They can remediate it on site, bring good clean steel over to redo the stadium. We have the spring works with all the steel in there to use to save the taxpayers money and rebuild what we have. And I'm going to give you a perfect example of this analogy because I was the last Western Maryland employee hired. We had the largest roundhouse in the world. And for some reason, the city decided to tear it down. Now we get all this money given to Martinsburg. All these West Virginians are brilliant. They're rebuilding this dinky little roundhouse when we could have restored our roundhouse and had the largest roundhouse in the world, and worldwide, the largest tourism is the Civil War for the United States. Second largest is railroad buffs. Even more than baseball is railroad buffs, believe it or not. So that's why I'm for redoing the old stadium. And I don't know what Tony said or Peter to step on anybody, but I just like the idea that we could bring Willie back, we can bring Jim Palmer here, we can have our own outfield with some statues or a place for these people.
The problem is the Suns won't play there.
You guys don't want to play there?
Am I allowed to speak?
Because, I mean,
It's not easy to do. It's a non-starter, to quote myself.
because, I mean, you know, you have a little bit of stone in the outfield, and you're saying not to remove the stone. I'll give you a little, when I worked for Mike Callis as an engineer, we brought the Rust-Oleum plant here. I was just out of college. I worked under Dick Kinswater, and I actually did the drawings for Peter's dad to bring GE here at the plant, or the warehouse they had out off of Morgan's Avenue. So it's real easy to cure this outfield. All we got to do is bore some holes, put some small, very small, either quarter stick dynamite caps, wouldn't even do anything, or saw cut it, cross cut it with saws. You have it level, and you have an easy base to put on it. That's like nothing to level that outfield. That's like zero. That could be done in a matter of a week if you bring the right crew in to do that. So
Point of
we have a good
clarification.
base.
Did you or did you not just say you would help finance the stadium?
Well,
What-
I'm
can you-
going to help finance it with money donated by the DeBoer and Metzner families, and we can do that. But I've got something here. Has anybody
generous
here,
of you.
Has anybody here read this? I had to use the Public Information Act to get it. Has anybody here read this? This is the study that was done in 1998 for the city of Hagerstown with the Army Corps of Engineers for the possibility of using the municipal stadium for future baseball works. So I have it right here. In 1998, they appraised the Physioc property at $740,000. And this study says the possibility of flooding there is once every 20 years. Well, that could happen in any one of our own backyards with a rainstorm. But this is it. This is the whole study, which I've looked at real well. Have you guys read this and
No.
looked at it?
I have not seen it.
And you did 2 studies on the stadium, and you've never looked at this?
That's correct.
I find that amazing. I find that amazing, actually. Don't you? I mean, doesn't
Just
everyone find that amazing?
As just a point of clarification in our own defense, we were not analyzing municipal stadium. We were looking at downtown and the impacts it would have, and then alternative sites they would have. We were not looking at municipal stadium.
You didn't look at municipal stadium at all?
No, that was not what we were studying.
Oh, so the concept A isn't for the current site? Where it says municipal stadium?
Yeah, this is of the existing site. It's a
Oh.
concept we were asked to assess for its impact potential.
Okay, well, I just wondered. Anyway, that's my feelings on it. I love baseball. My son still plays baseball. He's playing for his team in Virginia right now, minor league team. Like I said, Tony is a great baseball guy. This guy shags balls. He's still out there trying to live the dream. He's put his money where his mouth is in investing in the team. I'd hate to see the Nationals leave because the only thing better than that would be the Orioles. So I will do anything I can.
I would implore you that if you or Physioc family or anybody wants to contribute to this effort, we're all ears. And
Well, I think the Physiocs are contributing by agreeing to finance it at 5% interest, which I think is fantastic. I don't think $8,400 a month, it sure beats $30 or $40 million. And we have that problem cured. I think we have so much talent in Hagerstown. I'll give you a good example.
Well, actually, I'm going to cut you off because I don't know if there's other folks that are here that want to make some comments, and we're coming up to our time of adjournment. So
I just
do
want to say
move
one
things
thing,
along.
just another situation for what I have said. You look at what the Preeny family did with the Old Peoples. They kept the original concept, they upgraded it, they did it, it's beautiful. This is the kind of thing that can be done with our stadium and keep it going that way. That's all. And thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to make any comments? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I want to thank you for the opportunity, and I enjoyed looking through this while you were making your presentation. I have 2 or 3 concerns with the report. My name is Nancy Allen. I'm sorry, I live on Oak Hill Avenue, resident of the city for 25 years now. This whole stadium issue keeps resurfacing time and time again. The concerns that I have are based upon the funding, because I feel that in no way, shape, or form can this community withstand a tax increase. I look at the concept of a private partnership, private-public partnership that has been discussed, and with any type of economic development, when you're thinking of building something, I think before you do that, you need to do the due diligence and find the money first. After you find the money, then you look at the best possible location. And I know that we've been looking at these 3 sites here, kind of, kicking them around a little bit. I like the idea of it being on the interstate or having some visibility for travel back and forth and having that type of a magnet draw to our location here. And I think, too, that in all proximity to where the Nationals play in Washington, D.C., and I'm a huge Nats fan, that They like being here because it's easy for them to rehab their players. When you have Zimmerman and you have Harper coming through, and Strasburg worked here too. You have a lot of good things to this location in Washington County. I think you need to utilize that and market it better than what has been done in the past. And so I would say to look at this from a funding problem first, figure out where you're going to get the money from, and I don't want it coming from me as a taxpayer because I can't take on that extra burden right now, and I don't think I'm alone when I say that. Number two, I think you need to look at the best location for the best bang on the buck. And when you're talking about investing $30 million, you need to have a huge return on that investment where you're going to have the type of location, and I hate to keep saying this, but you look at the Shorebirds, and they had a huge benefactor there. I'm sure that we can have a similar type of person step up to the plate, whether it be Under Armour, who came from University of Maryland, who might like to invest his money here and have a stadium naming type of thing, where you give them the naming rights for the purpose of helping to fund the stadium, and that way you're generating that private partnership here that we so desperately need. Because I would like to see the Suns stay in our community. I think they're a valuable asset. I think the return on the investment for the economic development of the whole community is there for the taking. But we have to be smart about that, and I think first of all we need to figure out where the funding's coming from. And it's easy to say go to Annapolis and get the money, but guess what? That's still my money that's coming from Annapolis, and I don't want it to be my money because times are tough right now. We need to be cutting back on the spending and being responsible about these projects. So therefore I say go find the funding first and look maybe to the Suns and their marketing department and find that, and then I think everything else will come into play, and it will all solve itself, because then you've got the money to know how you're going to build this stadium that's going to be state-of-the-art for the players, for the team, and for the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. We'll take one more comment, and then we'll have Mr. Coleman. And then any other public comments, I would invite you to remain for our regular session when we have another opportunity for citizen comments.
Kind of hard to follow up that.
Please introduce
My name is
yourself.
Cullen Coleman. I'm president of my neighborhood's first chapter, Elizabethtown East. As such, I'm definitely for promoting East End development in general. And when I look at these 4 concept areas, the 2 that stand out the most is concept B and also the hospital site. But personally, I think that the hospital site has certain limitations to it. The size, the grading issues, the rubble issues, the methadone clinic, a lot of senior housing along the western side of that portion. I think the easiest one to actually probably push forward would be for concept B, other than the fact of the park, but I don't see why we wouldn't be able to possibly purchase maybe a portion from the hospital, the old Meredith site, and put a new park in that facility. I know that they proposed 69 townhouses with a park in that area already. So I don't know why we couldn't do that, but and I also did like the concept C, and I'd actually promoted the stadium being on the corner of Mill Street and Baltimore Street. I think the problem with that is probably going to be the moving of the light department in a fast enough pace to actually have the new construction of the new stadium within a reasonable time frame for the Suns to be here. But the concept B in general, it allows for further expansion of any sort of development of the East End in general. It even shows that the possibility of moving the light department in the future. So you could put maybe some other sort of multi-use facility there, retail there, or other commercial properties there to generate tax base. It has a large area for potential future development, basically along Town Run and along Memorial Boulevard. It seems to me that you could even incorporate, say, the statue of Willie Mays at the old home plate. So when you're walking through the parking lot, you're walking through that area, you could actually maybe, if there's a building there, then you can even build like an archway tunnel that has a Hall of Fame, memorial to those players as well. So you can incorporate some of the historical effects of that. But in general, I just think it would be a better catalyst for any sort of East End development, all the way from Washington Street, which Meredith owns, and obviously down through Antietam and Baltimore Street, but then all the way to the milk facility, incorporating green space in there, creek walks along Antietam. There's numerous different creeks along that area, especially there's also the one along 40 where the House of Kobe is. You can even have a creek walk there as well. But just in general, I just think that would be the better option. That's it, any sort of catalyst for development in that area. And there's also going to be downtown revitalization efforts at the same time. I don't see why you couldn't use those efforts in conjunction with each other and try to increase the standard of living within those two areas themselves, downtown and East End, and kind of push them together. And I know we're trying to push for a greater generation of young professionals to move into our area, into Elizabethtown East. I think it would be a better and easier sell. Even I know that Meredith had proposed the 69 townhouses at the hospital site. You might be able to try to focus, or Meredith might be able to focus, middle to higher income households in those areas and try to increase the standard of living that way through residential. And then also try to create better walking space from downtown along Antietam, along Baltimore, along Washington, and try to really focus on those areas for people to want. They're mixed use areas, a lot of them. You can actually have little boutiques and shops along the areas and just try to really tie them in together. But I think it's short-sighted just to focus on just the stadium itself, try to use it as a catalyst to advance further development for the city in general, and increase the tax base in that regard. And I guess I'm sure I have a lot more to say, but we're limited on time. So, and I don't know if Mr. Perini wanted to talk as well.
Thank you very much, Cullen. And at this point, we're going to adjourn the meeting to take a break. I would note that our regular session will be starting at 7:30. Thank you.